NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Elastic Security empowers security teams everywhere to prevent, detect, and respond to threats quickly through a unified solution. And it's free and open, putting you in control. Use Elastic Security to eliminate blind spots by analyzing all of your data, no matter its volume, format, or age. Stop threats at scale with automated threat and anomaly detection, and arm every analyst with fast search and integrated case management. Download or try Elastic SIEM for free and experience the benefits of an open security solution backed by world-class security research at securityweekly.com/elastic. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto-Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Welcome back, everyone. My monitor died, so I wasn't sure if we were back. Oh no, we are back. Welcome, everyone, back to Paul Security Weekly. Learn how hidden vulnerabilities lead to application compromise in our next webcast with Sneak. You can register for our upcoming webcast by visiting securityweekly.com/webcast and check out our previously recorded webcast on securityweekly.com/on-demand. Make sure you join our mailing list and receive an invite to our Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. Yes, all things are now virtual, and as Jeff was expressing before the show, yes, we all miss each other very much. I'm just randomly texting especially my friends in information security, who I miss very much, and just kind of checking in, saying hi, and like, let's have a beer when we can do that sort of thing. So it's actually a meme from the dude from Taken. It's like, when this is over, I will find you and we will have a beer. Certainly on the list of people that I'm looking forward to having a beer with, but we'll take it virtually on this show. Mr. Ed Skoudis is here with us, no stranger to the show. He's been teaching cyber incident response and advanced penetration testing techniques for, I like how we don't say how many years, because I won't say how many years Ed's been teaching, but to more than 12,000 security professionals. Ed Skoudis, welcome back to Paul Security Weekly.
Hey, Paul. Hey, team. It's great to see you guys again.
Yes, nice to have you on the show, Ed. Ed, of course, you know what's interesting, Ed? I look to you and others like John Strand and so many of the talented faculty at SANS for explaining all of those technical details to myself and thousands of others, tens of thousands of others in our industry. When I look at things like electrical engineering, and I'm like, wow, can I get someone like Ed or John to teach that too? Because it's really complicated. So thank you, Ed, for doing that over the years. We'll talk more about some of the things you're doing in terms of educating people right on this segment. So.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And, you know, we love doing it. And also, we learn a lot from you guys. This show is just a tremendous wealth of information for the whole industry. So thanks for all you do.
Well, thank you. So now, Ed, you've got a bunch of free events coming up that we want to talk about before we kind of delve into the news. And you've got several different things going on. So I want to turn it over to you to explain these opportunities. I really look at them as opportunities for our audience.
Yeah, we got this big thing coming next week. It's a summit. So SANS has been doing these summits for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. And we were planning one for Denver on June 4th and 5th. And we were going to call it the SANS Pentest Hackfest. But then coronavirus hit, right? The idea of this event was to get a few hundred people together, charge $250 for it, out in the mountains. It'll be a good time. We'll have some great speakers. But about 3 weeks ago or so, when you know, the world shut down, SANS looked at it and said, well, gee, we're going to go all virtual for this. And what if we just made the whole thing free? And then why don't we add to it a bunch of CTF events and also we could do a qualifying round for a big CTF there, and then have the finals there at the event. Oh, and let's do an entire track, a full day of talks on CTF and cyber ranges. So we're kind of taking all this stuff together. The whole team, the SANS team, has been working so hard for the last 3 weeks to make this thing a reality. And it launches 1 week from right now. It'll be June 4th. And on June 4th, what we're going to do is we're going to have the Pentest Hackfest. So there's going to be a lot of great speakers. Didier Stevens will be speaking.
Oh, nice.
Tim Medine's going to be speaking there. Lots of other folks. That'll be June 4th, and it's going to be focused on the offensive art. So, it's the Hackfest. Then on June 5th, that's Friday, we're going to go 2 tracks. One track will be more Hackfest talks, and there's a lot of great stuff there. And another track is the CTF and cyber ranges. And we're going to have folks like Derek Rook, who's going to present on getting the most out of CTFs online. We're going to have several panels that talk about how to build your career using CTFs and what makes for a good cyber range. So it's 2 full days, completely free, of really, really high quality talks. As of now, we have about 7,000 people signed up. We're expecting to hit around 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 at the high point. So that's the topic matter, and people can just go to their favorite search engine, type SANS Pentest Hackfest. It'll be your first link. Click on that, and you can see the summit agenda. I'm doing a talk on leveling up your career with CTFs and cyber ranges. I'm super excited about the talk. I've been working on it for the last week or so. We're also going to put a lot of stuff in there about Holiday Hack Challenge and another new project I'd like to talk to you about a little bit called the H2 Matrix. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the cyber range stuff that's in here.
And I want you to just take a look back in history. When did you first start doing CTFs? Because there were not as many when you started,
true.
Right?
In fact, I'm actually going to that's the start of my presentation. It's like, how did I get involved with this? And the first CTFs I ever did were the DEF CON big CTFs, like DEF CON 7, 8, 9, 10. When they were sort of free-for-alls, there was like no real goal other than just throw some systems on the network and hack them.
Right.
And then the ghetto hackers got involved, and they started making organized, goal-driven CTFs. I cut my teeth on what the ghetto hackers created.
So you were basically a player back.
I was a player, exactly. I was a player. How about that? Don't hate the player, hate the game. But anyway, so I played their game for 4 or 5 years, loved it, and learned how to tell a story through a CTF, how to make it exciting and interesting. And I tried to model a lot of those lessons, and I learned a lot more as we continued to start making it. In fact, based on what I learned from the Ghetto Hackers game, I worked with Mike Poore, another big friend of the show. He and I sat down once at a bagel shop during a SANS event lunch, and we sketched out the first actual CTF for the 504 class. That's awesome. So that was the first one I ever made for a CTF. Yeah.
And this is like early 2000s-ish?
This is 2001.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
It was before September 11th.
But now we fast forward to today, because I find it fascinating that there's like an entire day of tracks basically focused just on CTFs, right?
Yeah.
Because there are so many CTFs today. There's entire communities around some of the, like I see a lot of the we have a Discord channel now because we're trying to be hip and cool or whatever. It's actually a great way to connect with our audience, and I love it. But in doing the research for having our own channel, I was like, there's other channels, and a lot of the focus are folks collaborating and recommending CTFs for people to, like your talk, level up for their career and gain knowledge and skills. Yeah,
and my talk, I'm really going to try to take people into that world and talk with them about how they can join it and be part of it, and measurably increase their skill set by committing to it. So I've got a bunch of tips for how to do that.
Right. Ed, what are some of the major categories of CTF? I don't want to spoil your talk, right? But at a very high level, if we're talking about CTFs and folks haven't really done much with them, what are some of the major categories?
Major categories, a lot of them are offensive focused. Root this box or hack into this box, get shell. So there's a lot like that. There's also a lot of crypto ones out there. So if you're interested in crypto,
like a puzzle, more like a puzzle. Yeah.
What I'm really focused on is stuff that's always available, always online, so that you don't have to wait for something to start up. There are a lot of them that will run at like a B-Sides event and sometimes be remotely accessible. They'll start up for 2 days or 3 days. Those are wonderful, but I'm really focused on the ones that you can use anytime. There's some that are focused on reversing software, either malware or reversing software that might have flaws and finding those flaws in the software. There's a lot of web app-centric ones, both basic ones as well as advanced ones. And I'm going to go through a taxonomy of these things in my talk and talk about how to engage with them.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, so there are other talks in an entire track on June 5th, right? That we'll talk about other talks on CTFs.
Yep, on different CTFs. Like I said, Derek Rook's going to be presenting on different free CTFs and what you can do with them. James Line is going to be talking about how do you choose the right cyber range or CTF to build specific skill sets. We've got a lot of panelists that have built ranges that are going to be sharing what they've built. Also, Chris Elgie, he's a good friend of the show.
He came on the show last week, I believe. Yeah.
Yep, that's cool. He's going to be...
Ed, what's the difference between a CTF and a cyber range?
I believe there really isn't much of a difference.
Okay.
A well-done CTF has a range in it. I mean, it's very goal-oriented because you're trying to capture the flag, right? But a range should also have a good story and feel goal-oriented as well. Some people draw a distinction that I don't find terribly useful. I don't want to be controversial here, but some people say that a CTF is much more linear and scripted and planned, whereas a cyber range is something you dump people into and they kind of have to figure out what's going on, and it's not as linear. I think this is such a spectrum that separating them that way doesn't make sense because most of the stuff is in the middle, and it's CTF and cyber range if you use those definitions. I use the term interchangeably myself.
If I may, Ed, what I'm hearing you say, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but one sounds more like a role play and one sounds more like improv.
Yeah.
You could say that. That said, there's some good ranges where you're playing a role. Yes, but you're playing a role. The role that you're playing,
when I think of CCDC,
I didn't say which was which.
Well, when you think of,
I noticed that
when I was involved, Larry and I were involved with CCDC. There was still, even though it was more like a range, right, where they were kind of thrown into an environment, there were still roles in a story and goals like you would have in a CTF. So
exactly,
in that way, I can see your point as well. Yeah,
that's right. And then there's different kinds of things. CTF, well, capture the flag, so that means it can't be forensics, right? No, there's forensics where you're pulling flags out of the forensics artifacts, or defend the flag. Some of the cyber defense folks are focused on defend the flag, prevent it from getting captured. So there's so many different variations. And part of this event that we're doing June 5th is to go over all the different variations, kind of inventory them, talk about the definition of a cyber range and CTF. We're going to discuss all of this for a full day with the goal of trying to help people sort it out and decide what's best for them to move to the next level in their careers.
It sounds like, this is very much my opinion, that folks getting into this field or want to get into this field should do at least one or more of these exercises, and the information they're going to learn in a day-long track like you're presenting is going to help them navigate it, right? I truly believe this should be something everyone does to get into the field, right?
And I hope they'll come out. I hope your viewers will join us. I mean, it's going to be a fun thing. A lot of information shared. I'm particularly interested in the player's perspective, but I also want to hear what a lot of the range builders and designers think. That's what Chris Elgie is going to tell us. Yeah. But several other folks who've done military grade ranges as well as free CTFs, they're going to be there sharing ideas and what drives them and makes it all work. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and when Chris was on it, I thought he brought up a very good point in that, in the military, put cyber aside for a moment, the military is very much groomed for, we're going to do an exercise, right? That's how they train. It's not necessarily sitting in a classroom, right? Is to go do an exercise that has a storyline, that has goals, that has objectives, and that's how they train. It was very, I think, easy for the military to transition to a cyber range or cyber exercise.
Yep. And our very first panel that we're doing, I'm going to do my talk first. And then after that, there'll be a panel. And the panel is, what can we learn from military kinetic ranges that can help us do better with cyber ranges and CTFs? And there's some things we might learn that help us. And there are some things we might say, no,
don't transfer.
This is not a lesson we want to carry over into the cyber range side.
Right.
Like blowing stuff up.
That's our first panel.
Like blowing stuff up. That could be fun, though.
blown stuff up. Yes, you know, in the military, you have the ability to fight back, which you in the civilian world often don't. So we're going to talk about some of those differences.
Well, then there's the who do I fight back against in the cyber realm?
Oops.
Well, the original cyber range, which was titled Eligible Receiver, 1997, they pulled the plug on it when they raised DEF CON up to a certain level.
Yeah, that's right.
That was like not really a range though. Those were actual targets.
Yeah, I was being a tad facetious. You caught me.
Rule number 1: don't start a nuclear war.
Yes,
but to the point though, I mean, what the military does is live fire tests, and in my ongoing occasional debate with Ed about, you know, the future of pen testing, I mean, that's one of my assertions. I think a good pen test really should be a live fire test, as close to real world conditions as possible. Which, if you want to do it in the context of a CTF or a cyber range, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
But that's what I like about CTFs and these challenges, is it's similar to a pen test in that in a pen test you're presented with challenges and or puzzles, right? So it kind of gets you in that mindset of I have a mission and I'm going to come up against my first roadblock. It's going to be some kind of challenge or puzzle, right? I mean, that's true in a pen test or a CTF.
And a forensics or incident response scenario is the same way, right? It has the same properties. So
it's awesome.
It's kind of cool. There are some differences, though, and I find these really fascinating. When you're doing a CTF, you know there should be an answer. So that might make some people more likely to continue. I know this can be done. Whereas in a pen test, they might give up because you don't know if it can be done.
Right.
But it can also frustrate other people. They might say, I know this can be done and I can't do it, therefore I give up. Whereas they might not give up in the pen test side. So it's just different personalities and how they address this situation of knowing that there's a solution, and whether that drives them to solve it or makes them feel inadequate and they can't get there. It's different psychologies.
It's a great point, because you know, in a pen test, you got to know when to give up, right? And move on to the next
exactly. So
thing.
to that psychology, Ed, have you thought about any of these cyber ranges or CTFs with unsolvable problems?
That's a great point, Larry.
We talked about
Kobayashi Maru.
Great analogy, Joff.
It's not our style at CounterHack and SANS to give the unsolvable problem, and I think it would really upset people. That said, sometimes you want to go against type and tell people that you have. I don't think you'd put one out there saying, we think this is unsolvable, but we might put one out there saying, we haven't come up with a solution to this, but we suspect there's one there, and labeling it as such. We've never done it before. It's against our style, but maybe.
So, you know, I want to make a comment on something you just said a minute ago, Ed. The fact that when you're engaged in a CTF, and I've experienced this too, you know there's a solution there. My gut reaction is not to give up and to keep persisting, of course, but it also, I believe, kind of encourages, and it may not be a positive pattern, but encourages this way of behavior that you know that there's a cadence and there's a solution there somewhere. And I think, you know, there tends to be also kind of channels within which certain problems fall into, which is not necessarily healthy, but and sometimes can be contrived. So producing a good CTF is a significant challenge to try to avoid some of those pitfalls.
That's absolutely true. There was a wonderful discussion, a thread on Twitter a few days ago about what makes for a good CTF and a bad CTF. Several folks from my team participated on it. It's really quite interesting. And one of the things that Ron Bose, a guy on my team, pointed out is sometimes there's challenges that are hard and you don't see the answer right away and you have to work your way through it. And what we're aiming for is that when you've solved it, your feeling is one of aha or eureka or I've accomplished something, not, oh, those bastards, I can't believe they wrote that into the challenge. We don't want to write challenges like guess what I'm thinking. Instead, we want it to be based on what you'll actually encounter in the real world. But there's some cool stuff on that too. We just did a pen test a few weeks ago where it was a web app, and it was like the weakest web app I've seen in 15 years. This thing was crazy weak. And the whole team was talking about how we can't use that to create the ideas from that to create challenges in Net Wars or Holiday Hack, because no one will believe that it's realistic. It's just too weak.
Yeah.
Yet we did a pen test of it, you know?
One aspect that's interesting, though, that in listening to this discussion is, I think one skill as a pen tester is the answer, the solution to the problem may be that this is not exploitable in this environment, right? And I don't know how that translates into a CTF, Ed, and that's a question for you.
Yeah, it translates to people hating you and hating the CTF because they spend a bunch of time.
Right.
Yeah,
which is, it's valuable in the real world. I mean,
it is.
You know, we talk about the value of a pen test. Well, at a bare minimum, the pen test shows that someone with your skill set, trying the things that you tried, and let's say you can't get in, won't be able to get in, right? I mean, that's at least it means that. It might mean more. And there's value to that, showing that I can't get into your system using the techniques that I did. But in a capture the flag environment, you, the person doing those techniques, feel frustrated and almost robbed. Like you didn't get your value. You didn't get your win. You didn't get the little dopamine hit.
Yeah,
in your
that's
brain.
true. The value is off between them, right? Tyler and I just went through that. I was like, Tyler, I think there's something here, right? And then I was, Tyler's in companies way better at that stuff than I am, and then I came to the same conclusion way later than they did, right? But at least I came to the same conclusion that this is not exploitable in this particular condition, right? I think that's an important thing, and there's value in that in a pen test, right? In a CTF, not so much. Yeah,
that's right.
The hard part is, though, of course, as pen testers, we're really driven to win, right? We want to succeed and to actually sit down and document all the avenues that you tried is extremely valuable to the customer. But as the pen tester,
but you hate it.
I hate writing that finding.
You hate it.
Yep. And in a traditional CTF, all that stuff that you spent trying and doing, and maybe even writing down for yourself, that's not useful to you explicitly in the capture the flag event.
But writing the other point I wanted to bring forward, though, on the dopamine hit, Ed.
I've been called worse.
Sorry.
You've also been called better.
Thank you.
Joff, I'd like you to meet Ed.
I've known Ed for a long time. It's the I learned something. That is a big part of that dopamine hit, because it's, to me, that's the most, and I still love doing CTFs today. That is the greatest value if you take that away and go, oh my God, I learned something. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
right?
and Joff, you're right. In that example with Tyler, what I came down to was like, well, I spent a lot of time on that. I'm like, but if I got to look at anything positive that came out of that, was I learned something. I forced myself to have to go read documentation and apply it to the situation. I'm like, I learned, and therefore there's value to me as an individual, and in a pen test value to the customer, but different from CTF environment. But learning is if you go down the wrong road in a CTF and you learn a bunch of stuff, I still say there's value in that.
There is. Well said. And, in preparing this talk and in preparing this whole event, this summit on June 5th, I've been looking back over the last 20 years and thinking about how much CTFs and cyber ranges have impacted my life. And I mean, really, they've changed everything. I mean, from the initial DEF CON CTFs through the CTF for 504 and 560 to Net Wars to Cyber City to Holiday Hack Challenge to, all these different things, both as a player and as a creator. My life would not have been the same if it wasn't for these things, this really neat idea of gamification of cybersecurity.
Also, I think in that kind of element, Ed, I think, I don't know how to say it, but like it got a lot of people off the streets, right? Like if we didn't have CTFs to practice on, we might, back in the day, we're like, yeah, my lab is like China, right? Like we might go after more real, people with without the ethics, morals, and values that we have. Right. May turn to real targets, right? This gives them and all of us an avenue to practice and exercise our skills in a completely legal and controlled environment without violating the law, right?
I'm going to put that in my talk. That's a really good point. I'm going to put that in the talk. I'll add a slide on that idea. Because, back when I was a kid, there really wasn't a place to do this other than to explore on your own, and let's not get into the details of that.
Right. Or, I mean,
high school was interesting.
It was too expensive to acquire all the equipment, especially early on, right? I think they got a little easier, like in the early 2000s. You could acquire equipment. Like I would build my own lab in my house, right? But you were still limited as to what you could acquire. And I think a lot of that has changed for the better.
You know, you'd have one computer when I was a kid, right? It's like that Back to the Future thing where Marty says somebody has 2 TVs, and his mom's dad says, "Oh, come on, nobody has 2 TVs." Yeah. It's like back in the day when I was a kid, we had one computer for the whole house. That was it. Right. And if you tied it up, and we had a modem, and if you tied up the phone line, that was it. Right.
Yep. And then so, when Paul was building his labs, it became I only have one rack because that's all my mom will allow me to put in the dining room.
Yeah, it was in the living room, like the formal living room. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is rarely used by any house in America ever.
Right. So I made it a lab. I mean,
what the plastic's on the furniture for.
I have a question for you, Ed. And you touched on it a little bit, I think, in terms of what you're doing June 4th, June 5th, you know, the 2 tracks on the second day. But we've spent a lot of time talking about the joys of CTFs from the pen testing break-in perspective.
Yep.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what, if anything, the days offer for those that are, dare I say, blue team or trying to defend and hone their skills on how to detect all this kind of type of stuff?
Absolutely. That is so important because it is not an offensive cyber range / CTF day. We're going to have all different kinds of CTFs represented there, including there's going to be one talk, really interesting one. It's going to be by Phil Hagen, and that's on how to create simulation environments over long periods of time so that you can pull from it artifacts for forensics analysis. In other words, if you're doing forensics analysis or even blue team type stuff, when you grab a bunch of data, if somebody pulls that from a range that they ran for a couple of hours, generated some attacks on it, and then pull that data, it's so unrealistic. So what Phil has done, Phil Hagen, is he's run a range for like 3 to 6 months where there's different attacks and different activity, doing packet captures, file system captures, log captures, so that way we can provide to the blue team person or a forensics analyst a full data set over time that they can then analyze and find various forms of evil. It's much more realistic. And another talk is going to be by Tim Conway, and he's put together cyber ranges that represent power grids. And how do you defend the power grid? What kind of artifacts do you look for there? The players there are essentially hunting in the power grid for bad guys. So he's going to do a talk on that. So Jeff, it's so good you brought this up. This is not all about the offensive CTF. That is an element of it, but we're going to get into the forensic stuff, the cyber defense stuff, even the power grid stuff. It's going to be awesome.
Cool. I think it's a good segue into some of the usage of CTF, right? And I was describing to you earlier that I appreciate. I love doing the CTF and following the storyline and going through it, and I have to block off time for that, right? Yeah, often in my role, I have to test one particular vulnerability, exploit, defensive technique, maybe all in one, and I want to do just that, right? Yeah. And you have kind of started to come up with maybe some ways in which we can do that. And I encourage folks getting to the field, follow the narrative, do the CTF, even folks in the field. That's valuable, right? But there's also scenarios where I need to do this one part of the exercise, right?
Yeah. So it's this idea, and I've not told anybody outside of CounterHack this idea, but I'm going to tell everybody about it next Friday. So this is like a sneak preview for you folks. I was sitting there thinking about the C2 matrix, right? That great thing that was done by George Orchilis and Bryson Bort and a whole bunch of volunteers, where you can look up different command and control tools that you might use in a penetration test or red team exercise. The C2 matrix. I'm sure most of your listeners and
I think Bryson Kimmel was talking about that on a previous segment.
Yeah. He was.
Really cool stuff. So I was thinking about that, and I was also watching Katie Knowles talk at KringleCon in December of 2019, where she was talking about different ways that you can get yourself ready to do CTFs, right? I mean, very interesting. So I was thinking about those two things, and then I was thinking about Holiday Hack Challenge. And every year for Holiday Hack Challenge, I come on the show and we talk about the challenges. And each year there's probably 10 terminal challenges or more. There's 12 or 13 or 14 other challenges, offense, defense. This year we had a lot of blue team stuff, 2019 Holiday Hack. And we leave them up all year round. And every day, 2 or 3 or 4 people will play them. I mean, we spend thousands of dollars per year keeping these things hosted in Google and AWS so that people can play anytime that they want. But these things are massive undertakings if you're going to play the whole game end to end. So I was thinking about the C2 matrix. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we had a matrix so that if you wanted to learn one thing, maybe you wanted to learn how to do cross-site scripting in a Node.js environment, for example. Well, we have a Holiday Hack Challenge for that. There's actually one in Holiday Hack 2015. But if you didn't know that, how would you ever know that? How would you find it? Or let's say you want to do something with, JSON and manipulation of JSON. Well, we have a Holiday Hack Challenge on that in Holiday Hack 2018. Or you want to do SQL injection, or you want whatever it is that you want to do. So we put together this big matrix, and we call it the H2 matrix. H2 could stand for Holiday Hack or Ho-Ho, right? H2. And right now, it's a list of all the Holiday Hack challenges, each individual challenge, the level of difficulty of the challenge, the technical areas that it will allow you to learn and explore, what it's associated with, like, is it pen testing? Is it cyber defense, right, for Jeff? Is it a defer? Is it command line skills? So that you'll be able to go in and say, look, I have a pen test next week. It's on this particular technology or this particular platform. I'll look up and say, there's a Holiday Hack Challenge. We also have a shortcut on how you can get to that challenge quickly, plus all of the answers for it and all of the hints for it too. So it's a way to allow people to more easily dissect and digest in bite-sized pieces what's in the Holiday Hack Challenge universe. That's the idea of the H2 matrix. And I hope it will allow people to practice and build individual particular skill sets better. But that's kind of just the start. I mean,
shouldn't it technically be H2F matrix?
H2F?
Holiday Hack Fest, or is you're counting Hackfest as one word?
No, Hackfest is the event that we do in November, which you've come and visited me at Hackfest. So, but the Holiday Hack Challenge is HHC. So it could be HHC2, but C2. So we went with H2, and it could be Holiday Hack or it could be Ho-Ho.
But what I like about this balance, right, is I really want to encourage folks, you should build your own infrastructure and labs, right? And that's part of it, especially if you're not in an IT role where you have to build stuff, right? My role today at Security Weekly, I do have to build a lot of stuff that we use in production, right? Yep. So when I want to go test some vulnerability or exploit, it's basically time management. Do I want to go build that so I can test something, or do I want to go to the H2 matrix and go, hey, it's got a great thing for this type of cross-site scripting that I really want to learn. I can just go there and do it. I don't think you should be stuck. My advice anyway, in my opinion, is don't get stuck in either one, is balance your time of building out some of your own lab environments so that you learn how to build stuff, because that's so important. But don't try and build everything, right? Either go and learn the specific things. And I guess it's somewhat taking a shortcut, but my advice is to balance it.
Yeah, because you might see, if you have to build out the whole infrastructure, and you have a short period of time before you need this skill, you might not be able to do it. Right. So the idea is to enable people to do that. I was having a conversation today with Ron Bose about that very thing, about how this lowers the barrier to entry for building certain kinds of skills, because you don't have to build the infrastructure. I agree with you, Paul. You should learn how to build that infrastructure. But if you have a pen test next week on Node, you should be in Holiday Hack Challenge 2015 this week, right? Because it tells you exactly what to do.
Right.
Yeah. So we're excited about it. And then there's even a bigger idea that we might launch down the road. But there's this H2 matrix thing, and you'll be able to ask the matrix questions like, hey, if I want to learn a challenge of medium difficulty on this particular technology with this particular technology stack under it, what challenges do you have for me? And of course, we'll tell you the Holiday Hack ones. But beyond this, we could add other free CTF challenges and kind of open it up to the community, just like they did for the C2 matrix. I'm inspired by those guys to maybe add other things from the community so that the H2 matrix can grow beyond just Holiday Hack and be a useful service for the whole community. That's the ultimate long-range goal with this.
And what I love about this, Ed, and you're going to chuckle, right? because as a student, and whether you're the teacher or the student, right? We've all been the student, and some of us the teacher, right? We all have this preconceived notion about where our knowledge or skill level is in a particular area. Students do as well. And oftentimes, I think it's just human nature to go, well, I understand that technology, so I'm going to start at the advanced level. And you get to the advanced level, and you're like, oh, crap. I'm totally not ready for that. I need to go back to the basic level and then work my way up. And I think it's difficult for an individual to know, like, exactly where their skill level is without having to test it. Like Pluralsight, for example, has a great thing where you can be like, hey, I want to learn Python. And I'm like, I've been coding in Python, but I know I don't know everything. I know some stuff, but where's my knowledge level at? And they have you take a test, right? Yeah. And the test is sort of accurate, right? Like it may be like, okay, like no, I do know that. Like I shouldn't maybe start in the basic level. I should start one level up from that, right? But it gives the student direction to start at the appropriate learning level, which sounds like the Matrix can also give you as well.
That's the hope. I mean, I don't want to overpromise this, but at a bare minimum, it will help you find challenges on specific technologies to get there quickly without building it out yourself, and learn some skills, read some hints, and then look at the answer. That's the minimum this will do. I hope it does more.
And that's important. That's important. Yeah. Jeff.
So I want to pivot a little bit on what you just said, Paul, and ask Ed sort of a philosophical, I think it's a philosophical question. What we're talking about is very much oriented towards the hacker technical hands-on side of the security world. Yet there's this other side of the security world that is not necessarily hands-on, that approaches things in a different way, yet has in my opinion, has a significant role to play in the ecosystem of providing security. Ed, what, if anything, can you guys do to either attract, for lack of a better term, non-technical people to get into this thing, or is there a possibility of a softer, non-technical type of CTF that can just sort of, pivoting off? You said cyber defense. You labeled me with cyber defense. It's PCI, damn it. For people that are approaching security from a compliance, regulatory, we don't really understand security. All we know is we got to do a bunch of things that we don't really understand. Is there a way to create some sort of a CTF to just sort of, if not pique their interest, wet their whistle, or just, pick a metaphor?
I think there is.
Dip their toes into the water.
I haven't myself done that, but I think there is a way to do it. I was in Saudi Arabia in early February. They hosted a big conference there, and people came from all over the world. And they had this thing they called the cube, and it was a big cube that you would walk inside. And in there was a scenario that unfolded on screen after screen after screen. And you'd have to go to the first screen, and it was an incident. Your organization, a petroleum organization, as you might imagine, Saudi Arabia. You go in, your organization has been hacked, and you have to choose kind of your own adventure and answer questions. And the creator of the cube kind of walked me through it. And it was a very compelling and interesting storyline, and you really wanted to get the right answer. Now, the hard thing about doing that is some of these choices might be debatable, right? So there's a lot of context in those human decisions that have to be made there. Still, what I saw there in the cube was pretty darn cool, and could be like the precursor for exactly what you're talking about, Jeff. It was neat.
You didn't get it. You didn't get
the cube shiny by any chance? Maybe gleaming?
Stop.
Oh.
Ed, you didn't get assimilated when you were in the cube.
The Borg.
He wasn't referring to the Borg.
No, that's really awesome. I think I'd like to start to transition into some stories. I do want to say the link to the Pentest Hackfest and Cyber Ranges Summit is in the show notes, wiki.securityweekly.com.
And we do have a lot of games that we're running there. We're running Jupiter Rockets, which is a pen test range. We're going to be running Core Net Wars tournament with that. It's free for people who register, so you got to register for that. So we got Jupiter Rockets. We also have something called the Fundamental CTF. If you're newer or maybe more intermediate, you do that. So there's lots of different opportunities for CTFs and ranges being played on February 4th and 5th itself. So
that's
keep that in mind. All for free.
That's awesome. Definitely check it out. I did want to talk about at least one story that we had in common. Lee and I think, both flagged this story, that Israel's national cyber chief warns of the rise of cyber warfare. And they pointed out that an attempt to hack Israel's water system marked the first time in modern history that we can see something like this aiming to cause damage in real life and not to our IT or data. So I have a couple of comments on this, like the elephant in the room. So we can just leave out all of those previous hacks that cause damage in real life that I want to hear from the other hosts and get examples. And like the big one, like say Stuxnet, which obviously it's, well, I mean, we all can speculate that Israel and the U.S. were involved. However, we have no official confirmation, of course. But, you know, what about hacks against phone systems in the 60s? Didn't they potentially cause some kind of damage, maybe cause damage? No one's caused damage in the real world before things like even Stuxnet, as an example. You know, people use that as kind of an example in Stuxnet, like, oh, that was the first time we caused real world damage. I just don't think that's true. Larry and I and several others, right, looked at the first hack, which was actually a wireless hack. It's one of the first hacks that we can go back to in history that was a hack over wireless to show how insecure audio transmissions over wireless were. Actually had maybe not physical damage, but an impact in the real world in that audio was injected into that wireless stream. So I think that I just want to kind of level set with a lot of the media talking about, you know, the first time hacks, you know, caused something in the real world. I mean, we all, you know, witnessed war games when we had to up the DEFCON levels, right? Oh, wait, that was a movie. Never mind.
Right.
And an exercise called eligible receiver.
And an exercise called eligible receiver, right? But I mean, there are, and we've all, you know, sat around and had beers together amongst ourselves and with our peers and learned about hacks that did cause damage in the physical world, you know, long before the incidents today or Stuxnet.
I don't know, Paul. It's been so long since I've seen anybody in the flesh.
Right?
I'm not sure that you're actually real anymore.
Right?
Can you say something to verify yourself?
Yeah.
Something you are and something you have.
Right.
No, back to the point at hand. I don't know. What did you ask me?
Is there a question in there?
I would like examples of hacks in the cyber realm that caused physical damage in the real world, right?
Well, just look at industrial control systems. There's examples all over the place. There's actually a fairly notable example in Australia that happened years ago.
Yep.
Of
sewage.
Was that
total mind fight now?
Was that sewage being leaked into the water system?
Sewage system.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a sewage.
Wasn't that on the beach?
And you know, this I have firsthand witnessed how this could happen because I have done assessments at sewage processing places, and I think anybody of us who have done them have seen how primitive some of the controls are, and just how disconnected people are in the industrial controller space from anything cybersecurity. Drink, I said cyber, entirely. So that was an insider threat, I believe, in the Australia case. But
it was a disgruntled contractor, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And insider threat
and I think about one that was now certainly it was some demonstrations of real world attacks. That was the Aurora project, where they detonated the generators for power generation.
Yep. It was the first real example that someone could hack in via the cyber realm, for lack of a better term, and cause physical damage to a piece of equipment that was involved in industrial control systems.
But the biggest one of all is the Ukrainian hacks against the power.
Yes. Agreed.
I mean, so what that article said kind of wasn't true given the Ukraine situation, for sure.
Absolutely. And what I love and somewhat fear, love in kind of a weird way, is that, you know, they not only turn the lights off to the grid, to customers, but also turn the lights off in the control room.
Yeah.
I thought that was like, if we were to sit together and all be evil, like that's something we would come up with, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it suddenly came flooding back to me one of my favorite Ed Skoudis quotes. And I'm going to quote you, Ed.
I'm in trouble.
And that's on the subject of air-gapped networks. Because when you talk about industrial controls, everybody says, well, it's air-gapped. It's secure, right? And I actually remember years ago having a discussion with one of my customers, and they said, don't worry, it's air-gapped. And I said, well, show me. And the guy said, yeah, look, at the end of the day, this is not the Ed quote. I'll get to that. At the end of the day, I walk back into the switch closet, and I unplug the wireless router from the switch. It's air-gapped. So, the real situation.
But you know,
air-gapped 8 hours a day.
Air-gapped in the case of Stuxnet was, well, I work on this Step 7 project file, and I put it on a USB thumb drive, and then I take it over to the air-gapped network.
Which segues me into the Ed quote, and Ed said, at some point, I don't even remember, said, an air gap is not actually a barrier. I'm paraphrasing here. It's just a really high latency network.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Touché.
Yep. Well said. Well said. Thank you for the quote. It's true. It's true.
But I mean, even on this show, we've covered the tornado warning system, right? Which was hacked. We've covered billboards, right, that were displaying pornography. You know, I've personally heard stories about traffic light systems. We've seen hacks against transit systems, and actually physically getting the tickets, right? Like, there's, I think, a lot more examples. I'm not sure why the media is really kind of harping on some of this stuff, maybe to just be sensational. Where you know, attacks. Even I would go back to the phone system, and you know, I failed to come up with like examples because my memory is bad. But of, you know, you could basically hack the phone system and cause an effect in the real world. I don't think that's really anything new.
Yeah, totally agreed.
I mean, we kind of joke that War Games obviously is a movie, right? But you know, President Reagan President Reagan watched the movie and then requested briefings about how this could happen in the real world, and lo and behold, I mean, that you know, basically led to some of the first thinking and legislation surrounding cyber attacks.
Yeah.
Pause and think about that for a minute.
Yeah,
right?
So yeah, my mind immediately goes to, you know, like I'm traveling down the street and I see one of those gray boxes on the side of the road that's obviously a traffic light control system or some sort of telecom provider. And, you know, for us in our community to resist the urge to stop the car, jump out, unplug, pop open the lid and look for an Ethernet jack. I mean, it's almost an almost a compulsion. I mean, it is a physical feeling that comes over you.
Well, you know, I go back to, you know, the days of Twitchy, when Bluetooth was shiny and new, and they started putting it inside of cars, right? And
I remember this.
Yeah, right? Hackers, we quickly figured out that we could inject audio inside of a car. And I'll never forget the story. Twitchy told it on the show. You know, Bob was in a coffee shop. Starbucks, and there was a vehicle that had pulled up, and the parent got out, left the kids in the car, which, by the way, I'm totally fine with that. It's not an issue for me, right? Got out of the car, went in to get their coffee. Kids were still in the car. Bob figured out that they could inject audio into the Bluetooth system in the car. And what was the audio message, Larry? Do you remember?
Your dad is a bad man.
Yeah, it was something like that. And like the kids were like freaking out and like, you know, getting out of the car going, Daddy, the car's talking to me, right? I mean, that was probably 14 years ago.
It didn't hurt that the guy was parked in a handicapped parking space.
Right.
Clearly without a handicap tag, and was at the end of a very long line and was being very self-righteous that he had to wait in line for his
right.
Starbucks.
There's a whole story there,
So,
but yeah.
Yeah, there's.
Anyway.
So can we move on to other
please.
stories, Paul?
Yes,
May I
please.
introduce?
Let's do it.
So I'm trying to put Ed on the spot as much as I can. I don't know why I like it. It's just too fun. So my article number 1 is there was a data breach disclosed at Bank of America, which, Bank of America being a bank, being a financial institution, I think collectively would categorize as they probably got a pretty mature security organization because they're financial services. They've been in it forever.
You won't get many of us on the panel today to weigh in on that, but continue.
You're chicken.
Whoa. Somebody freshen Paul's drink.
I think it's called NDA, but anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Whatever. All right. So mythical bank that shall not be named, a large financial services organization. They're getting popped for some inane, and it wasn't like a major thing compared to, how many customers I'm sure they have. It was some specific thing in terms of, I think it was payroll protection or something like that, paycheck protection program. But, how does all the stuff that we do on the hacking side, the security side, CTF, red teaming, pen testing side of the world, how do we reach out to an organization like this and say, guys, you're still missing the point somehow, Ed?
Yeah. So I can't comment on any specific case. Please understand that. But I did a talk years ago called The Bad Guys Are Winning, So Now What? And the central thesis of this talk was a sufficiently motivated attacker will get into every organization. I mean, eventually, no matter what, it's going to happen. So what does that mean? And then I spend like 45 minutes talking about the implications of that. And one of the big ones, though, Jeff, is you have to be able to detect and respond rapidly because you can't prevent everything. And from a pen test perspective, you ask, what are we doing there? I think it comes down to we red team with their blue team. So doing this purple team exercise, they'll be able to detect and respond faster to realistic threats. I mean, that's how I'd answer it.
Yeah, and I think also an interesting aspect is the larger the organization grows, the greater the attack surface. And sure, you're going to couple that with more resources to be able to understand all the assets you have and, detect as much as you can. But in these larger organizations, Cisco as an example in the stories, they were breached via the SaltStack vulnerability.
Yeah.
When you start getting to that large of an attack surface, it's exponentially harder to prevent every breach and exponentially harder, to Ed's point, to detect and respond in an expedient manner to every breach, right? It gets harder the greater your attack surface. An attack surface could just be the size of your, tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees, tens of thousands of, assets.
Yep. But if you spend all of your money on the prevention side of things, you're still going to get whacked and you're not going to be able to detect and respond.
Agreed.
So you have to have some balance. Prevention is good, but you got to have some detection and response ready to roll. Mm-hmm. And you have to practice that.
And I agree with all that. And I don't know if, Ed, you were listening earlier, but I've been doing some research lately on MITRE ATT&CK framework, and we're talking about MITRE ATT&CK framework. It seems like every third episode of Paul Security Weekly in one way, shape, or form, and it seems like there's a lot of focus on detection, which traditionally I would think, I agree wholeheartedly. You can only do so much prevention. The real heart of what security is being able to detect early and minimize the damage. I agree with all that, but we all agree with that, but we seem to spend 90% of the time in all the different things that we do, trying to do all the fun, cool stuff to attack and break into things, and we don't seem to focus as much on. I mean, it's in there. I acknowledge it's in there. By inference, if we're doing this, you ought to be able to detect it, but. I guess my concern is, and I agree, the bad guys are always going to win. I agree with that. And it's sort of the 800-pound gorilla of this whole industry. But, short of teaching specific, how do you find this specific thing, which is my biggest concern about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, even though it's the real world stuff, how do you train people to look for things that are just interesting and abnormal that don't necessarily map back to some previously known, previously published.
Sorry, I want to give Ed a chance to respond, but Jeff, I mean, my story number 3, attack pattern detection and prediction, speaks directly to kind of your notion of how do we protect against the next threat and not get focused on the MITRE attack framework and research about attacks that have already happened. And it's essentially talking, and I'm not sure I buy it, right? But I think when you present that notion, Jeff, I'm kind of thinking I buy it more than I did when I first read the article, because it talks about using artificial intelligence and machine learning to predict what attacks might come next. And I know many of us attackers kind of groan at that, because we know we can change our attack techniques and beat AI today. But is there a future where, that becomes a lot more difficult? And so the article, this quote, again, we may dismiss it, but I think it directly speaks to kind of your question, Jeff, of how do we protect against things we don't know about and aren't specific like we're talking about today? And the article says, it is believed that security researchers can use attack pattern recognition or detection methods as an approach that can provide precautions to prevent future attacks. It's somewhat I kind of read it as somewhat science fiction, but they do quote specific research that is looking into this, and I thought it was an interesting discussion point.
I don't think it's. I'll let Ed chime in, but I don't think it's science fiction. I think it's the nuts and bolts of, I came from a DoD background, and that's what we did in the DoD is we tried to figure out ways to predict the unpredictable, to detect the previously unknown. I mean, that's the art and the science of it all rolled into one. I think part of the problem trying to translate security into the commercial world, which is largely what we're talking about, is we've built an industry around defense and learning, and I've been part of it, frankly, so I have to confess, building defenses based on what was previously done, and security by design is defensive, and all the PCI is essentially written based on things that were done in the past.
Agreed.
And so it's been responsive. And I think that's a lot of what we do. Add on to that the ability, we want to buy products and automate the process so we don't have to learn about it, yet alone think about it. And yet that only addresses so much. And then there's this unknown for the dedicated adversary, somebody that's after you, nation state, APT, whatever you want to call it, that really wants to get at you. As Ed said earlier, they're going to win. And we tend to not. Well, let's just not focus on that. You want to really buy our product because we can help you here. But Ed, go ahead. I'll shut up.
It's a great topic, and one of the real thought leaders in this, I think, is Chris Sanders. I'm sure you must have had him on the show at some point, right?
I think so. The name sounds super familiar. Yeah,
he's a brilliant guy, and he's been looking at how very accomplished SOC analysts do their job, and looking not at specific events that are telltale signs of an attack, but looking at events that this is kind of weird.
Right.
In my gut, this doesn't match it. He's trying to understand the psychological processing that those analysts are doing so he can try to teach others how to do that. And I just saw a tweet from him yesterday. He's got a new honeypot book coming out. So to use honeypots to do that, I mean, that can help to recognize something that's never been seen before, because once they get on your honeypot, it shows that they're there. Now, honeypot's not a new technology or anything, but Chris Sanders' intellect applied to sort of the behavioral SOC analyst understanding with honeypots. I'm super excited about that book. It's not out yet. He says it's coming out this summer. It's a self-published thing. And I make no money on it or anything like that. I'm just telling you because I think it sounds really cool. And he is a very important and intelligent voice in this problem set of how do you make SOC analysts smart about stuff that you yourself don't even know about yet.
It's interesting. It's almost, feeding
Chris has been on the show.
Okay.
I think we talked to him more about Rural Technology Fund than the SOC analyst stuff.
That Chris Sanders, yes.
Maybe he needs to come back.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting. If we look at, we've been doing analysis, security analysis for 20 years, right? And largely, after 20 years, we can look at something like a packet capture or a log and go, that's kind of weird. Like, I don't know exactly why that's kind of weird. It's kind of a gut feeling, but that's kind of weird. And we need to take that thought process, and what I love, Ed, about what you pointed about Chris's research, take that thought process, not only be able to teach it to SOC analysts, but use that to feed an AI engine and give it good information. So give the good information to SOC analysts that don't have 20 years experience, and give that to also to AI engines that also don't have that 20 years experience is hugely valuable.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, so I just want to make a comment. The thing that's running through my head as you're talking about this is also something that I become overly concerned with when I'm talking to customers, because they tend to hyper focus on the tactics, the tools, the tactics, the techniques, and not the intent. And I think that's the real delineator here. What a good SOC analyst is going to do, what a good psychology is going to do, is look at those indicators from a perspective of what is the overall long-term intent here, instead of what is the tactic that's raising that red flag. And I think that's a fascinating topic. It's also one of the topics that encourages me to tell some of our customers, you should get another pen testing firm, which is counter to healthy business, frankly, but you should, because you need to see somebody else's tools, tactics, and techniques, because it's not just about this path.
Which is why AI and like the automation, the long-term strategy of automation, and whatever blinky box or product AI is going to come out with is never going to be able to predict the adversary. Like, yes, we need to be focused on the behavior. What is your business risk? Where are the important things that allow your business to make money? How are you planning to protect those from the outside in? And then figure out how to do that appropriately around high-level behavior and not those TTPs or the IOCs. If we get stuck in IOC land, I will always find a creative way to bypass whatever the hell you're going to put in front of that. So, regardless of whatever AI thinks that I'm going to do, I'm going to throw a wrench in that, because as humans, that's our natural God-given gift to be creative, to be able to think outside of the box and to build something that has never been seen before, and you just cannot predict that.
Tyler, that's a fantastic point, because I think that the AI is flawed because of humans, right? And I think there's two different schools of psychology in offensive defense in terms of cyber attacks, right? And I think that on the defensive side, you're kind of shy as a human to predict the most evil scenario, right? But as an attacker, that's your natural path. And I think we need to take not the defensive kind of thinking, but the offensive kind of thinking, and feed that into the AI model. And again, I actually just finished Countdown to Zero Day by Kim Zetter today, right? Which is why I'm using Stuxnet.
What did you think?
As an example, right? But what was interesting in the context of this conversation is the understanding that alleged U.S. and Israeli, cyber teams had to have to conduct those attacks. I think that the defenders never would have kind of threat modeled that an adversary would go to those lengths to acquire that knowledge to pull off those attacks. And that gets into the technical details of how fast the centrifuges spin, right? Because they didn't just make them crash. I think that's the, kind of the media, forgive the pun, spin on it, right? They also slowed it down so they weren't enriching as much uranium, right? But they also controlled the pressure. And in order to build that into the malware, there was a lot of deep knowledge they had to have of the uranium enrichment process in general. I think as defenders, we never considered that an adversary may acquire all of that skill and build it into a piece of malware, right? However, had the attackers been feeding the defensive artificial intelligence, then it has, I think, a better chance.
But Paul, think about what you're saying. We need to take this AI and teach it to think much more evilly. Yes. I saw the Terminator movies, okay?
That's probably how the Terminator was created.
I'm telling you, yes.
Right? That's a great point.
Skynet.
Evil is subjective, too.
It's true.
If you want to start throwing in all the sci-fi movies. What we perceive as humans is evil. I mean, the whole premise of Terminator was we're trying to preserve the world, and the biggest problem with the world is humans. So let's logically eliminate the problem.
But that's Ed's point, right? If the AI understands how evil we are, they're going to want to wipe us out because, like, God damn, humans are evil, right?
You are evil.
I mean, that brings in that whole concept of offensive tools and their ability to be evil and cause evil. Like, we really do have to evaluate, and I won't even get into that argument because I disagree with most of what other people are saying, but really we do have to be careful with kind of where we're at with AI. You look at any of Elon Musk's real in-depth or crazy interviews and talks about AI, and we're really not that far off of building something sophisticated. Well, it will never replace a human. It does have the ability to cause great damage and make the attacker's job much, much easier, right? Like, you look at something like Death Star, that didn't work out quite as well as everyone thought, but that's pretty bad. Then you look when you start to apply that to maybe some of Scythe's new capabilities, and you're like, oh wow, I mean, that really does help both the kind of the purple team offense and defense really improve and do things quicker and better. But that could also be, very, very substantial in an attacker's hands.
But Tyler,
an attacker's probably already doing that, right? Like,
Tyler, the fault of the Death Star was the thermal exhaust port. I mean, just
It was, and why put an exhaust on that? Like, why can't you just?
Well, let me. I agree with what we're saying, but let's add another layer, and I can do it in the context of pointing out another story, which I've been lazy and I haven't read the Verizon report yet, but I pulled up articles where somebody else has read it, and my story number 3, and the additional layer I want to throw into this mix is, while we can, to some degree think evil, and we can debate whether it needs to be built into AI or not, the ability to think evil and what could be done pragmatically, realistically, there's this level of, what is the motivation of the bad guy? Why would they, if I'm a company doing whatever, why would somebody come after me, and what would be their motivation? This report actually, and it seems like pretty obvious to me, but they wrote a report on it. The analysis of the Verizon report is money, not espionage, is the heart of cybercrime breaches. That may not have been true 30 years ago, but it seems like the state of things these days are, they're looking for some sort of economic return, whether it's nation state or different APTs, different hacking groups. So to what degree, with all of the discussion that we've had, how do you weave into the why? All right, we've had all these evil thoughts, all these things could happen. Would a bad guy do it? I frankly sometimes think, and this could be completely off base, that the good guys, the pen testers, hackers, the people that we run with, we think more evil thoughts, I think, sometimes than the actual bad guys.
Yeah.
But I
wonder
don't
this
know.
every night.
The evil bad guy or bad person thoughts, right, are highly compartmentalized, right? And I think that we tend to kind of gloss that over and think that every bad actor has mostly short-term goals, and those are largely financially driven, when I think it's a lot more complicated than that, in that I believe most organizations, if not all organizations, are targets, depending on like how deep down that rabbit hole you want to go and how deep that matrix of bad actors goes, right? Again, but kind of coming back to Stuxnet.
That's thinking evil, but why?
But again, using Stuxnet as an example, because I just finished the book, if you go back to the very beginnings, there's evidence that there was malware attributed to the same actors that was largely intelligence gathering that ultimately led to the operation. Those early operations did not target Iran directly. They targeted lots of other companies and lots of other companies that had pieces to the puzzle that were targets that was used for intelligence gathering to know that, hey, if I want to affect the pressure, by the way, it's this type of software, it's this type of valve in this type of centrifuge. And by the way, I know that because 2 or 3 years ago, we broke into the company that was ultimately going to be the supplier and or the designer of said systems. I was having this very same conversation with my neighbor, who I think was very overwhelmed, my new neighbor, very overwhelmed. And I asked them what they did, and they were like, "Oh, I work for a plastics company, and I work in operational technology." And he's like, "Oh, we're putting in new software," and I'm like, "Is it Siemens Step 7?" He goes, "Yeah. How did you know that?" Right? Like, and then I'm like, "Well, it's Stuxnet." He's like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Oh boy, like sit down." And so now my other neighbor who works in threat intelligence in information security, and we're talking and explain it, and then like quickly we looked around and we were the only two people like left talking. Everyone else had left, kind of thing. Oops. Which was kind of comical.
Including the Step 7 guy.
But the Step 7 guy was like, "Why am I a target?" Right? And we're trying to explain to him this very same notion that you may be in the supply chain, right? You may have information that fits inside of a puzzle that at some point, some in the hierarchy of bad actors are going to target you because you've got some piece of the puzzle.
I think that's the part that's missing, though, that when I think, am I being too evil? Am I like always thinking so evil that like, it's not even applicable? I don't think that's the case, because you look at any of the good APT groups that are actual nation state, like we said before, they're in it for the long game. This is a 100-year war for them. They're setting up for the next 100 years. We as Americans, as Western civilization, are very short-minded. What's our 1-year goal? What's our 5-year security roadmap? These are very, very short-sighted kind of gauges as far as this overall war and cyber setup. If they're in it for 100 years, that means that they may be implanting on the circuit level, at the chip level, for a very long-term game that we have no insight into. That's how I would do it, and I'm not thinking as evil as maybe they are, because they have time, money, and resources and skin in the game.
Well, it turns out there's evidence of that. It goes back to the Cold War, before the cyber realm, right, where the U.S. was actually doing that.
Right? Yes, I can.
Right, it's the same. I
can confirm and not deny that.
Right, similar techniques that I think were declassified, right, of some of the techniques.
But my question to Tyler would be, yes, I agree with that, but how does every company of every size in every industry respond to that? And or is there some sort of overarching governing protective entity that is or should be responsible for providing some level of protection for all the companies that realistically don't have the means or in any way, shape, or form of addressing or responding to that type of threat?
No, I mean, at that point, then you're looking at the failure and the integration of capitalism as a whole, right? Like, if you're there to make money, you've got to figure out how to be secure inside of your platform of making money as a business. And if you're not, like, we're gonna run into the abuse of, say, the government hops in and now is like this overarching limited protection blanket. And now you've got censorship, you've got insight into other businesses, and all of these things have been abused before and will be abused again. And so it's kind of you're going to have to deal with it, and survival of the fittest. Pay attention, do your homework, get the small things right, make sure you're doing the fundamentals, and at the end of the day, if you're doing those things, then you're doing as best you can with what you have. Don't be lazy and do the best you can. That's all you can really do.
It's interesting. It's somewhat of a segue into my story number 15. I think that dark reading is kind of on this myth debunking, Mythbusters kind of theme of articles. So they've got 3 SMB cybersecurity myths debunked. I particularly was interested in number 3, which is SMB leaders are lax about security and data privacy, as presented as a myth. And the data that they present for this particular, for number 3, is largely based on a survey. And I think that admitting you care about security in a survey is vastly different than actually doing it, or even understanding how to accomplish security, or knowing where your exposures are.
And just for the record, for the geeks out there that think we're talking about server messaging protocol.
Yes.
You're wrong. We're talking about small, medium business.
When I first read the title, I really thought it was about SM. I'm like, oh no, small business, not.
You see,
not server
went there. We're like, oh, SMB, man. Oh.
I mean, server message block, of course. What the hell else?
we are so intimately familiar with that protocol. You know.
There's the call for folks to write the article based on server message block, not small businesses.
Yeah, exactly.
Just turn on version 3 and you're all set.
You're good to go.
Yeah, there you go. End of story, right? That's right.
God.
V3 and we're all good to go. Did that happen to Ed? Is Ed still here?
I'm here. Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. I just couldn't see Ed.
I did want to transition into one of my other conspiracy theories, which I used my story number 12. NSA warns of new sandworm attacks on email servers. Russian GRU, one of my favorite groups to research and read about, was found. So the NSA published an advisory that basically said Russia's GRU is using CVE 2019-10149, which is the remotely exploitable Exim vulnerability, and everyone should patch. There was a warning, obviously, last year about that. We talked about it pretty extensively on the show. So my kind of conspiracy theory is the NSA is making a big deal about this now because, well, I mean, the cat's out of the bag, right? My tinfoil hat theory is the NSA knew about this vulnerability long before it was made public, either by acquiring it by some means, developing it themselves, discovering and developing themselves, or by observing the GRU, using it, and in turn using it as well until such time it was made public, and now there's a huge advisory because they want to basically wipe this cyber weapon off the table.
Yeah, I go with that theory. Bummer, we can't use it anymore.
Yes,
Rats.
right? We bought it somewhere from someone, right? We were using it. Lo and behold, GRU was using it too. Cool, no one knows about it yet, so we can both kind of use it in secret. But once it's public, let's make a big deal about it so we take the weapon away from, both parties, basically, right? It's like when your kids are fighting with the foam swords, you take both of them away so they can't hurt each other, right?
Or they found a bypass with a patch so that they're good.
I think it's appropriate we put the former token NSA guy on the line for this one.
No,
Jeff.
but hold on. Go back to Tyler's comment. That's the ultimate tinfoil hat theory right there. Just when I think I have a tinfoil hat theory, Tyler one-ups.
I mean, look at Eternal Blue and look at the original patch, and then you see that they had a way around that particular patch, and that wasn't actually what they were using. So, I mean, it's not outside of precedence.
Come on, I've known Tyler for a long time, and Tyler's tinfoil hats have tinfoil hats.
Right. Well, I think that in that light, Tyler is very similar to the Outlook homepage vulnerability that was so-called patched.
Which is so amazing still.
Right?
Does that mean we've moved on and I don't have to respond to your reference to the NSA guy?
Oh, if you can publicly, comfortably respond to my commentary, Jeff, by all means.
Well, of course I can't. And most of that is because I've been out for 25 years. I will just say this. The Enigma machine was broken in late 30s, early 40s, and the fact that it had been broken was only declassified and publicly announced in like 1988 or 89. Why? Because people were still using it. So why blow up a source of information? So, I mean, that is in the nature of the business.
I think today, my moral compass goes to if there is a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows and the NSA either discovers or acquires, or the U.S. government in some capacity acquires and or discovers that, I think there's a great panel discussion we could have, probably a whole separate segment on what's the responsibility, right, of all parties involved, right? The person discovering the vulnerability, maybe selling the exploit to the U.S. government, not knowing how it might be used. What is the moral and ethical responsibilities of the U.S. government to disclose that vulnerability and or use that as a cyber weapon? There's just a lot to that whole narrative that is different from your example, Jeff, of the Enigma machine, because it wasn't Microsoft that made the Enigma machine, right? It was Germany, so it was an enemy making that. So we don't necessarily. Ed actually has an Enigma machine, so I'd love to get Ed to weigh in on this.
You went through all of your theories, and I thought, well, they might be true, and I don't know if any of them are really that bad or damning. It's like I could live in a world just like the one you described, Paul.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think it'd be a great discussion to have about the ethics of, say, a U.S. government agency acquiring some knowledge of some vulnerability. I think it depends on the mission of that agency.
Yeah.
And this is what people, talk about the NSA. It's got sort of a dual mission, right? Foreign intelligence, but also protection of national security. And how do they balance that? Other agencies, DHS is focused on, Homeland Security, of course, so they should probably push for a patch. Whereas others are more offensive purely, and maybe they won't push for a patch. So I think it depends on the government agency that gets it and what's its charter. But then there's the bigger picture, too, of the government as a whole entity. What should it do? And I think it's ultimately going to come down to what stuff is happening in the world because of this thing. If really bad people are doing really bad things.
Right, just to add some color to that makes me agree with you that, like, I'm okay with the government having knowledge of vulnerabilities and having exploits, is I did not, until I finished reading this book, truly understand, and I probably still don't, but I understand more about the intentions of Iran and the whole history. Like, my assessment was, like, they legit wanted to create nuclear weapons and they wanted to blow up enemy countries. And you know what? U.S. is on that list of enemy countries, right? Israel geographically closer, of course, right? But so I'm like, yeah, okay, we need to protect, ourselves and our allies and people, right? And so in that sense, I understand completely what you're saying, is that, like, I'm okay with this stuff going on as long as the mission is true in protecting people, right? I think in some cases you're protecting more people than you would be, by releasing that vulnerability to the vendor so they could fix it. In other words.
But I think it'd be really to have a debate on the show about that. Get some people. I think we're fairly like-minded here on it, but get some people who would mix it up a little bit. And,
agreed.
Really interesting discussion, I think.
It'd be a great discussion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me add another wrinkle or two.
You got plenty of them to go around.
Whoa! That was zing! That was on the spot, Larry.
So,
love you, Jeff.
The whole premise from an NSA intelligence perspective is, how do you manage your information collection resource? I mean, that's the essence of the Enigma machine. I think in the movie, what was the name of the movie about the Enigma machine?
Imitation Game.
Imitation Game.
Yep.
Game.
They very early on had an example of, they decrypted a message, some, I think it's the right movie, some supply ship or something was being targeted,
yep.
and the person's brother was on it, that had decrypted the message, and he wanted to quick scramble, and let's go find that submarine that's about to torpedo the machine. They're like, no, we can't do that because they'll know that we'd broken it.
Right.
The more publicly famous example is the Japanese Purple Machine, which we had decrypted and broken very early on in the war, and after Pearl Harbor, there was intercepts where they figured out General Yamamoto, I believe was his name, the architect of Pearl Harbor. They figured out he was going to be on some plane, and they wanted to get him, but they wanted to do it in such a way that they weren't tipping off the fact that they had broken the communication. So they had this whole. All this to say is that it's a tap dance. There's this delicate balance between acting on the information and not destroying your resource. I want to put it in a slightly different term, though. I've known many pen testers and red teamers and hackers over the years, not recently, but I've worked with some of these people that would keep exploits and known vulnerabilities sort of in their bag of tricks and not disclose it either to the company that they were targeting, that they were being hired to break into, but on a larger scale, the vendor that was the cause of whatever way that they were getting in, and they would hold on to it as sort of the ace in the hole. To try to break in and be successful. As Joff says, you're not doing a good pen test unless you win.
Right.
What are the ethics of that?
I mean, don't be a bad vendor and have a good bug bounty program. Respond to people in a timely manner, and hey, if it's novel enough that I keep it and no one else is going to find it, it'll eventually get burned. So it's kind of discretionary based on how bad and what the overall public and private response could be.
Yeah, read between the lines, between the chuckling and laughter, that all of us are sitting on 0 days that we don't want to become public because we rely on for something.
And I'd also argue on the converse of that, if you're a victim of a pen test, I mean a contract of a pen test, and someone finds a 0 day in a product that you're using, don't let that thing die in the vine. Go work with your vendor to go get that resolved with the pen test firm, because if they help develop it, you're responsible and you're a part of that too. And well, it's in your good name and good graces, and can make a good name for you for helping resolve that.
But it's a great point, Larry, and speaks to Ed's earlier point. That sometimes the vendor may not fix it, right? So like the responsibility and morals and values depends on the situation, because we've all, I think all of us on the show tonight, right, have found a vulnerability in something and the vendors refuse to fix it. So then what do you do? There's also that
or the client doesn't allow you to contact the vendor in order to disclose it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
I think you got to just push hard. Our job is to make the world a more safe and secure place. That's
I agree,
what we do, right?
That's the bottom line. Ed's right on target.
Right, because if the vendor won't fix it, right, let's say the company you're doing the pen test is cool, like, yeah, we want to get this fixed, like we're using this product, the vendor won't fix it. Now you're left in that situation that we've talked about for the 15 plus years, right? What do? Do you release it publicly? Do you keep it to yourself? Do you share it with your friends? Do you pursue the vendor? What are the legal ramifications from that vendor suing you? Josh Wright and I had a lot of these conversations of, what's the legal action from the vendor? Like, and all of us have been in, or known people that have been in all of those situations. The right outcome is the vendor's responsible and fixes it, right? But I mean, let's be frank. We all know that doesn't always happen.
Right, and it can get very uncomfortable to push it to that point. But
Agreed.
I think that's what we have to do.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, speaking of kind of along those lines, Hacking Team is dead. In case you wanted to know, and one of the reasons I point this out is just this epic quote from the article, and my comment was like, "Wow, analogies." So, a former employee previously told Motherboard that Hacking Team, without Vincenzetti, one of the original founders, I believe, is like Nirvana without Kurt Cobain. So apparently, Hacking Team was acquired, and then the original members left, and the statement, I believe, that was posted to Twitter was that Hacking Team is dead. Which kind of plays into the kind of 0 day type trade and espionage for hire is what I would describe Hacking Team. I don't know, does anyone disagree with that kind of classification?
Seems reasonable.
I would assume there's a lot of other groups that are kind of in the same situation. Like I said, like we predicted when this whole COVID thing kind of happened, was their nation states contract a lot to a lot of these different groups. That's why you have overlap in a lot of TTPs or tooling. And I think a lot of this hacker for hire and these type of groups, well, Hacking Group is more of a professional kind of fronted company. I think the back end of this is kind of a very similar landscape from that standpoint. And so that may or may not lend to a lot more breach data, which, I think one of these articles here kind of points out. We've seen a whole lot of breach data happening in the last couple of months. And, I think we all kind of figured that would happen. And this may be one of those cases where this is kind of why.
Just a couple of stories as we round out. 6 musts for building secure software. Not a bad article. They do talk about cross-site scripting and do make good recommendations. However, if you're coaching a development team on cross-site scripting, my assessment today is like good luck. I think that the popular notion is we must sanitize user input, and that will protect us from SQL injection, probably more so than maybe cross-site scripting, because it's not necessarily about, air quotes, user input that we think of text being entered into a search field today. Largely back in the day, 15 plus years ago, that was largely the case. But today there's so much data in different mechanisms, different protocols in different forms that get sent between the browser and the server that could be manipulated by the user, it's extremely difficult to get rid of cross-site scripting in your applications, which makes it extremely difficult to educate and train your developers on how to construct an application that's going to be resilient to all forms, DOM-based cross-site scripting, cookie-based, XML entities. All of these are basically ways in which you can put different data in your browser, basically, that gets sent back to the server that could be interpreted and reflected back to you.
I would make the argument that it's becoming less relevant if you are developing in modern frameworks today and not in dated technology, right? Tyler's got the GoPro logo.
But even with all the different avenues, Joff, for cross-site scripting,
there's a lot of avenues, but there's also a lot of layers of protection now that there didn't used to be. If you look at some of these development frameworks, there's so much middleware in there that protect you. And then, frankly, if you go into some of the JavaScript-heavy front ends, you're not even doing traditional HTML transactions with the back end anymore anyway. You're just dealing with some sort of RESTful API instead. And so you're in a different world.
Yeah, but is that different world leave more attack surface?
I think it leaves a different attack surface. I don't think necessarily more. I think it's actually pushing more of the onus onto the framework developers to get it right as much as it is for the individual developers of the app. There's a lot more meat on the bones, so to speak, in the frameworks than there was ever before. I mean,
so I think it's more important than ever before that the components of your application, frameworks and other, have to be up to date to take advantage of those features.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at a web app pen tester today, if you zoom back, let's start with this. If you zoom back 3 or 4 years ago, they were spending a lot of time in Burp Suite, interception proxies, doing a lot of transaction replay, doing a lot of proxy history work. Today, if you look at a web app and you look at a pen test on a web app today, you're spending a lot of time in plugins, in the developer console, in JavaScript.
Yep.
You are not spending as much time in that interception proxy anymore because all you've got there is a fuzzing framework against the backend API.
Yeah.
You're having to be inside the browser now.
Right. Yeah, because it's not inside of a parameter anymore. It's inside the browser.
Yep. It's in the browser. That's my opinion.
And that's my concern, is that getting a handle on all those various inputs inside the browser is a daunting task.
I don't think we've probably scratched the surface deep enough yet. Right? We haven't really moved away from that interception proxy model as an industry as much as we need to. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for people to actually spend time writing plugins and spending time actually examining the DOM even more. That's just probably not happening as much as it should be right now.
I agree, and I think there's a lot to be learned for those folks that are kind of high up in the bug bounty kind of hierarchy, because I think those hackers understand that. Certainly more so than I do, right? And that's why they're able to get those bounties, because they understand the DOM, all the ways to interact with it, and can basically take a lot of those exploitation techniques that we knew about before and apply those to the modern frameworks.
And I'm not saying the old stuff's gone away. There's still a whole bunch of PHP out there, right?
You can pass stuff in parameters. I totally agree. Yes.
I think we haven't even scratched the surface on JavaScript and like the ad tracking and all the back end abuse that can happen with those things. Those things are still like very rarely researched and even more rarely looked at when you're doing a pen test. It's it's a different network. It's someone else's ad tracking. It's someone else's JavaScript code that you integrated. You can't really test all those pieces as part of like a good web app, because sometimes you don't own those assets. Sometimes you're not authorized to do that. Sometimes it's too convoluted even to understand what it's even doing at its core.
There's like libraries to load other JavaScript libraries. I'm like, good Lord.
Yeah.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, look, if it wasn't for JavaScript beautification tools, I would have gone insane by now. I mean, well, wait a minute, that's a bit subjective. Maybe I'm already insane.
No, because minification still wipes out your variable names, even if you can beautify it, which drives me insane.
Yeah, Tyler's too hot again. His camera just cut out, but.
Did anyone look at the latest news? And to be honest, I couldn't cut through a lot of the politics to understand the bill that passed through the Senate that the House just like yesterday pulled out of a vote. So basically, they didn't vote on it about the FISA bill. And I'm unsure. Did anyone look into what the actual reforms are to the FISA bill?
I think we were too busy like COVID-19 contact tracing stuff to worry about FISA.
It's kind of scary though, because it does play into the privacy of U.S. citizens in some capacity. I'm not exactly sure how, because I didn't get a chance to read the bill and truly understand it. And when you try and look at the media coverage of it, it's all politics, and it has nothing to do with like how the bill could either help or hurt the privacy of U.S. citizens, right? That message is lost in mainstream media, which I'm just flabbergasted.
Well, at least they spelled the word privacy right.
Oh, go ahead, Lee.
I said they spelled the word privacy right, but I'm not sure if there's no context. You're right, Paul. There's nothing that says, in the mainstream media, this is why it's as cool, important, or even relevant.
And that's what I think we really need to know. I mean, the Snowden leaks really highlighted some of the FISA court stuff, I think in a different capacity and not the full picture. There are other resources that I think paint a more accurate picture of how the FISA courts were used, but more importantly, how they were reformed, because here in the U.S. we have that balance of power that kind of corrects that as you go, and I think there were many useful corrections to that. But my curiosity lies in where we stand today, and what this bill could mean maybe for an increase in our privacy rights. Hopefully, that's what I'm hoping for. But again, it's tough to cut through the political.
Well, I
being
think
election year especially.
The problem is what's going on with the FISA bill right now is all about politics.
Yep.
The concern and what you're interested in is, what's sort of the ramifications or the fallout to those that actually care about the FISA bill and the FISA courts and what they do. And that's doesn't appear to be at the forefront of the interest, shall we say, right now in the FISA courts and the FISA bill.
Correct.
I can tell you what I was doing, and I'm going to put in a shameless plug. I was busy writing my webcast, which is going to be on June the 11th, how to securely deploy IPv6. I'm going to talk about IPv6. Black Hills webcast coming up.
I want to tune in, because largely I just disable it, and I want to tune into that webcast so I can not do that.
Yeah, don't. I've actually spent a little bit of time. I had one of those. Has anybody ever been in that mood where you suddenly go into a rage coding evening, right? I had one of those moments with V6. I was like, I'm sick of not understanding V6 enough. And so I spent like 5 days. And now I'm turning this into a blog and webcast.
Yeah. So, Joff, my burning question is whether you're a business customer or regular internet home customer, do I have to request in IPv6? Is that dependent on my provider? Like, how do I go about making sure that I get assigned an external IPv6 routable address, right?
Yeah, so it is dependent on your provider. And one of the first things I did when I went into this rage understanding session was called up my provider and said, give me an IPv6 block. To which they responded, we don't have any of those. And I said, well, that's disappointing.
Because I need to find a new internet service provider now. Because everybody has those.
Because that means as requests are going out, you're probably encapsulating in IPv4, the IPv6
Right. So my fallback position, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers because I'm going to do a series on this, but my fallback position was, I will tunnel it over IPv4 to one of the tunnel brokers. And, shameless plug here, but Hurricane Electric does a very good job of tunnel brokering. And they will give you a /64. Think about that.
Wow.
What?
It's awesome.
I have tunneled a /64 home It's an enormous amount of address space. I mean, it's bigger than the entire IPv4 space, right?
Challenge accepted.
No.
So it's going to be fun. The first of the webcast, just to give everybody a teaser, is I'm going to do fundamentals. I'm going to talk about some of the security concerns, and then I'm hoping to follow up a second webcast with what I practically did with an Ubuntu endpoint to actually build the tunnels and to build a basic network and secure that network. And then we're going to go on from there. So
it's awesome. Love it.
Oh, I got to see that. Oh,
Lee,
did anybody catch that the next big Windows update is intended to go passwordless using Windows Hello?
It doesn't surprise me. Microsoft's been a huge advocate of that.
I mean, I'm still a little creeped out by using a camera to unlock my desktop. Yes, I do it on my phone, but I'm not ready for it on the desktop. Should I be?
What I find interesting, though, with the facial recognition is if I wear a mask, obviously many of us are wearing masks, like totally does not recognize me, right? If I have a cigar in my mouth, though, it recognizes me, like through and through. Like somehow it's been trained.
The big question is, if you don't have a cigar
versus mask, right?
But if you don't have a cigar, does it recognize you?
That's what I'm worried about, Ed. Like, am I going to have a cigar in order for it to recognize me? I'm fine with that, but
supposedly the latest iOS update works.
What's that, Ed?
The latest iOS update works now if you have a mask. They improved that so that if you're wearing a mask, it focuses more on your eyes.
I was going to ask, do you have to wear the same?
For me, Ed. Didn't work well for me at all.
Do you have to wear the same? Yeah. Do you have to wear the same mask? Like, does it incorporate the mask?
That? I can't even tell.
Do I need a 3D barcode on my mask for my phone to read to verify that it's my mask?
No, what you need is one of those custom masks that have your face printed on it.
Yes.
They make those.
Well, and the real question is, did it actually improve it, or did it actually downgrade it to a less sophisticated algorithm? That's my question.
Yeah. True.
No, whose face is on the mask that you're wearing?
Can we start to exploit that with barcodes and other images and such?
Joff, blink twice if you want to come back to my place. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, Paul. I was going to make a comment about you having things in your mouth too many times, so you just totally laid that on the table.
Oh, man.
The best part of that, when Joff laughed with the mask on, you could see his glasses fog up.
Yes.
Yeah, right? That is a pain in the neck. If you wear glasses and a mask, that is a big problem. But anyway. Hey, shouldn't we close this thing out?
Completely agree. Unless you want to talk about thermal imaging as security theater, which ties into our mask-wearing discussion.
No.
Let's
have Ed give us some wisdom as parting thought.
Yes. Ed, cllosing thoughts. We'll turn it to our guest.
You're on the hook.
Well, hey, I mean, these are crazy times, right? We're all kind of quarantined here. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when things open up. But I'd like to thank all you guys for holding down the fort, doing these great shows while we're all sequestered here, sharing amazing content and insights. I can't wait to hang out with you. And like you said earlier in the show, I'm really looking forward to sitting down and having a beer with you guys sometime face-to-face.
Seriously.
Sounds like a plan.
Yep. And you know, Ed, as you saw earlier today, well, depending on when the package arrived, that we're thinking of you too.
Thank you. So this showed up in the mail the other day, and Larry sent it to me.
What is that now?
It's a small phonograph, which looks rather like the large phonograph behind me. And Larry sent it because he found it. It's his mom's. So it's now a little piece of treasure in my office right over there.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So thank you, Larry. Thank you.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight, albeit virtually, and we're looking forward to physically being in the same space and sharing drinks. And until that time, and until, of course, next week, we'll do this again virtually. That will conclude the news segment for Paul's Security Weekly. Make sure you stay tuned. Our next segment is about a really awesome book that I started listening to, so stay tuned.